Sir, you need to switch to 28E immediately, the flight attendant insisted, her voice sharp with impatience. This premium seat has been reassigned to a priority passenger. The elderly man gripped his cane, the one he'd carried since Cambodia, 1969. I specifically booked this seat, he whispered, but she was already reaching for his bag. Security will escort you if necessary. So he rose, each step agony, and shuffled toward the back of the plane. But minutes later, everything would change. What the captain did next would leave an entire aircraft in tears. Welcome to Stories Unraveled, where extraordinary moments of humanity unfold. Today's story will remind you that heroes walk among us, often unseen, until one moment changes everything. The morning fog clung to Chicago's O'Hare International when Walter Morrison arrived at Terminal 2. At 81 years old, Walter moved with careful precision, his right hand never leaving the worn wooden cane, carved from oak by his late wife Eleanor. The limp was pronounced, a permanent reminder of the day his helicopter went down in Cambodia, 1969. Walter had saved for 6 months to afford the premium economy seat on SkyWest Airlines Flight 447 to Seattle. His great-grandson was being baptized, the first family gathering since Eleanor passed. He'd booked seat 12A specifically, aisle access for his damaged hip, extra legroom close to the bathroom. When you're carrying decades of shrapnel in your bones, these details matter. He'd arrived 3 hours early, moving through security with practiced patience. His documents were organized in a leather folder, boarding pass, ID, and tucked behind them a faded photograph of 5 young men in flight suits. He was the only one still alive. The gate agent had noticed the Purple Heart pin on his collar. "Thank you for your service," she'd said, offering early boarding. Walter just nodded. He'd stopped explaining that the real heroes didn't make it home. When he finally settled into 12A, he exhaled slowly. The seat was perfect, proper support, room to extend his leg when allowed. He'd placed his medications within easy reach and closed his eyes. 3 hours to Seattle, then he'd hold that baby, continue the Morrison family tradition of service and survival. Walter Morrison had flown helicopter rescue missions in Vietnam and Cambodia. 317 combat missions, 3 times shot down, always returning to fly again. The third crash had shattered his hip and ended his flying days. But not before he'd saved 37 American lives. He'd earned 3 Purple Hearts, the Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor, and the Silver Star. But sitting in seat 12A, he was just an old man trying to get to his family. He didn't know that seat 12A had been double booked. He didn't know that Brendan Walsh, a Platinum Elite member who flew this route weekly, was already arguing at the gate. And he certainly didn't know that the young flight attendant walking toward him had already decided he would be the one to move. Madison Cross was having the kind of morning that made her question her career choice. 3 years with SkyWest, and she'd already dealt with 2 disruptive passengers before most people had their coffee. Now the booking system showed seat 12A, assigned to 2 passengers, a computer glitch that would become her problem to solve. Brendan Walsh stood at the gate, platinum card in hand, voice rising. "I book 12A every week, check your system." He was right. The record showed dozens of flights, same seat. But Walter's confirmation was equally valid, dated 6 months ago. "I'll handle it," Madison told the gate agent, already knowing how this would end. Walsh generated more revenue in a month than most passengers did in a year. Corporate math was simple. She approached Walter with her practiced smile. "Excuse me, Mr. Morrison. I'm afraid there's been a booking error. This seat has been double assigned, and we need to relocate you." Walter's eyes opened slowly. "There must be some mistake. I have my confirmation here." "I understand, sir, but our platinum member has priority. I can offer you 28E. "That's a middle seat," Walter said quietly. "I specifically booked aisle access for medical reasons. My hip, I'm sure you'll manage." Madison interrupted, patience already fraying. Behind her, Walsh stood tapping his foot, phone in hand, probably ready to tweet complaints to corporate. "Miss," Walter tried again, voice steady but strained, "I'm a disabled veteran. This isn't about comfort. It's about medical necessity." Madison's smile tightened. She'd heard every excuse. Everyone claimed medical needs when faced with downgrades. "Sir, if you can't comply, I'll need to call security. We can't delay departure." The threat hung between them like a challenge. Nearby passengers began to notice, some pretending to read while obviously listening, others openly staring. The cabin atmosphere shifted, that uncomfortable tension when conflict goes public. Walter's jaw set. In 50 years, he'd never asked for special treatment. But 3 hours in a middle seat meant pain that would last days. "This isn't right," he said simply. "Right or not, I need a decision. Now." The words were harsh, final. Walter looked around the cabin, at faces turned away, at Madison's impatient expression, at Walsh hovering like a vulture. He thought of his great-grandson, of Eleanor, of battles, fought for people who'd never know his name. Slowly, painfully, Walter Morrison reached for his cane. "I'll need a moment," Walter said, hands trembling as he gathered his belongings. The cane slipped, clattering loudly against the armrest before falling into the aisle. "Sir, we need to expedite this," Madison pressed, making no move to help. Behind her, Brendan Walsh had already pushed forward with his bag, ready to claim the seat the instant Walter vacated. A young woman across the aisle reached for the cane, but Madison waved her off. "Please don't interfere. We're handling this." Walter bent forward, grimacing as metal ground against bone in his hip. His fingers barely grazed the cane's handle. The cabin watched in silence as he struggled, face reddening with effort and humiliation. Finally, he managed to grasp it, pulling himself upright with visible pain. "Sergeant Major Walter Morrison," he said suddenly, voice carrying decades of command despite the circumstances. "Army Aviation, 3rd Battalion, 2 tours in Vietnam, 1 in Cambodia. Shot down 3 times. 37 confirmed rescues." He met Madison's eyes directly. "I'm telling you this so you understand. I've earned the right to the seat I paid for." Madison's smile wavered, but Walsh stepped forward. "Thank you for your service," he said dismissively. "But that doesn't change the fact that this is my assigned seat. Some of us have actual business to conduct. And some of us have great-grandsons to baptize," Walter replied quietly. "Enough," Madison snapped. "Mr. Morrison, you're creating a disturbance. Move to 28E now, or I'll have you removed from the aircraft entirely." The threat was clear: comply or don't fly. Other passengers remained silent, unwilling to risk their own comfort. An elderly woman muttered something about shame, but Madison's sharp look silenced her. Walter took one last look at the seat he'd carefully chosen, then began the long walk back. Each step sent pain shooting through his hip. His cane clicked against the floor in a rhythm that echoed through the quiet cabin. Behind him, he heard Walsh settling into 12A with satisfaction. As he reached row 28, squeezing past annoyed passengers to the middle seat, Walter wondered if Eleanor was watching. He hoped not. Some humiliations were best borne alone. Finally, Madison announced cheerfully to the cabin, "Thank you for your patience. We'll begin general boarding momentarily." Seat 28E was everything Walter had feared. Wedged between a college athlete whose shoulders invaded his space and a woman who'd already claimed both armrests, he tried to find a position that didn't send lightning through his hip. There wasn't one. The seat was narrower than premium economy, with no legroom, no recline, positioned directly beside the lavatory. The smell of disinfectant mixed with something worse made his stomach turn. His cane had nowhere to go, too long for under. The seat, the overhead bin, already full. He had to hold it between his knees, adding another layer of discomfort. The athlete shifted, his elbow digging into Walter's ribs. "Sorry, man," he mumbled without looking up. "These seats, right?" Walter couldn't respond. The pain was building. That familiar fire that started in his hip and radiated everywhere. He reached for his medication, then remembered it was in his jacket, now crammed in an overhead bin 20 rows away. Without water, without pills, he was trapped. Madison passed without a glance, though Walter noticed she'd brought Walsh a pre-flight beverage. The irony wasn't lost. The man who'd taken his seat was being pampered while he couldn't even access his pain medication. As the plane began to taxi, Walter closed his eyes and tried the breathing exercises from his VA therapist. In through the nose, out through the mouth. But each breath was shallow, compressed by the bodies pressing from both sides. His leg was already going numb, the precursor to cramping that would follow. A child behind him began kicking his seat. The parent did nothing. Why would they? He was nobody here, just an old man in a bad seat, invisible and irrelevant. Not the pilot who'd pulled men from burning wreckage. Not the husband who'd held Eleanor through 47 years until cancer took her. Just an inconvenience. The woman beside him wrinkled her nose. He was sweating now, his body fighting the pain. He wanted to explain, to apologize, but words wouldn't come. In a few hours it would be over. He'd see his family, hold the baby, pretend everything was fine. That's what he'd always done. But as the plane lifted off and pressure changes sent new spasms through his bones, Walter Morrison felt something he hadn't experienced since Cambodia. Complete helplessness. His hand found the Purple Heart pin on his collar, a habit when pain peaked. But for the first time in decades, it brought no comfort. 3 rows behind Walter, Dr. Angela Martinez couldn't concentrate on her patient notes. As chief of trauma surgery at Seattle General, she recognized pain in all its forms, and the elderly man ahead was suffering. But this wasn't just pain. This was deliberate indifference. She'd heard everything during boarding, the confrontation, the threats, the humiliation. She'd watched him limp past, saw how he gripped his cane, recognized the telltale signs of chronic injury. As a doctor, she knew. As the daughter of a Vietnam veteran, she understood, Angela observed carefully. The man was in distress, rigid posture, shallow breathing, periodic tensing that meant spasms. He needed medication, space, dignity, none of which he had in that middle seat. She noticed the Purple Heart pin, the way his hand kept touching it, the military bearing despite the pain. She pulled out her phone and messaged her brother-in-law, Marcus Chen, senior VP at SkyWest Airlines. He owed her. She'd saved his daughter's life 2 years ago. "Marcus, I'm on SW447. Your crew forced a Purple Heart recipient with obvious mobility issues from his paid premium seat. The man is in visible distress. This is not just wrong, it's potentially actionable. More importantly, it's cruel. Do something. Now. The response came quickly. Which flight attendant? Madison Cross. The veteran is Walter Morrison, seat 28E. Should be 12A. Checking logs now. A pause. Jesus. Morrison is flagged in our system. Decorated veteran, medical needs. This never should have happened. Give me 5 minutes. Angela glanced at Walter again. The athlete beside him had fallen asleep, taking more space. She wanted to help, but knew it would only embarrass him further. Men of his generation didn't accept help easily. Her phone buzzed. Captain Reynolds is being briefed now. Legal is involved. This is about to become Madison's worst day. Document everything you witnessed. Angela smiled slightly. Captain Sarah Reynolds, former Air Force, known for zero tolerance of veteran mistreatment. If anyone would fix this, she would. 4 minutes later, she saw the lead flight attendant hurrying toward the cockpit with unusual urgency. The woman knocked. 3 quick raps the emergency pattern. The door opened immediately. Through the gap, Angela glimpsed the captain, a woman with silver hair, shoulders suddenly rigid with controlled fury. The door closed. The lead attendant hurried back, stopping to whisper urgently to Madison, whose face went white. Angela settled back. Justice was coming to Flight 447. 20 minutes into the flight, the cockpit door opened unexpectedly. Captain Sarah Reynolds emerged, and the cabin atmosphere instantly shifted. Passengers sensed something unusual. Captains didn't leave the flight deck during initial climb, without serious reason. Captain Reynolds had just read Walter Morrison's service record, transmitted by Marcus Chen. What she'd seen made her physically ill. Morrison wasn't just a veteran, he was a legitimate hero. 3 times shot down, 37 confirmed rescues, multiple decorations for valor. The 3rd crash had left him permanently disabled after he'd held a landing zone alone for 6 hours, wounded, waiting for rescue, and her airline had forced this man to give up his medically necessary seat. Reynolds walked with purpose past first class, past row 12 where Walsh worked obliviously on his laptop, straight to row 28. She stopped, stood at perfect military attention, and in a move that would go viral within hours, rendered a crisp salute. The cabin went silent. Walter opened pain-filled, eyes confused. He saw the captain's uniform, the 4 stripes, the wings. Then he registered the salute, something he hadn't received in years. No one saluted anymore. Civilians didn't understand its weight. Sergeant Major Morrison, Captain Reynolds said clearly. Captain Sarah Reynolds, United States Air Force, retired. On behalf of myself, my crew, and every veteran who's ever been disrespected, I offer my sincerest apologies. Walter tried to speak, but Reynolds continued, voice carrying throughout the cabin. I've reviewed your service record. 3 Purple Hearts, Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor, Silver Star, 37 confirmed rescues, 300 combat missions. Her voice rose. What happened during boarding is inexcusable. I'm here to make this right. She turned to the lead flight attendant. Mrs. Patterson, please assist Sergeant Major Morrison to his rightful seat, 1A, first class, immediately. Captain, Patterson started, 1A is occupied. Then relocate the passenger, Reynolds said flatly. If that seat had not been given, voluntarily I would have given him mine. The athlete beside Walter had removed his earbuds, eyes wide. The woman on his other side shrank back. suddenly aware she'd been crowding a war hero. As Walter slowly stood, applause started from row 31, Dr. Martinez. Then another passenger, then another. Within seconds, the entire rear section was clapping, some standing despite the seatbelt sign. "Every one of you," Reynolds addressed the surrounding passengers, "watched this man be humiliated and said nothing. Your silence was complicity. Remember that." The words landed hard. But Walter was standing now, and Captain Reynolds stood ready to escort him forward, to restore not just his seat, but his dignity. The walk from row 28 to first class became a procession. As Walter moved forward, supported by his cane and Captain Reynolds' steady presence, passengers began to stand. Veterans first, recognizing something in his bearing, then others who understood. They were witnessing justice being served. An older woman touched his arm gently. "My husband was in Khe Sanh, thank you." A businessman stood at attention. "First Cav, Iraq, 2003. By row 12, half the plane was standing. Brendan Walsh looked up, irritated by the commotion, his expression changing when he saw the captain. "Jai." "Walsh," Reynolds said coldly, "gather your belongings." "Excuse me, this is my seat. I'm Platinum. You have 10 seconds to comply or explain to security why you refused a direct order. Your choice." Madison Cross appeared, face white. "Captain, I can explain." "Not now, Miss Cross." "Mr. Walsh?" 5 seconds. Walsh looked around for support, found none. Cell phones were recording. He could see himself in their screens, the man who'd stolen a veteran's seat. He gathered his things angrily. "This is outrageous. You'll hear from my lawyers." "I'll forward them Sergeant Major Morrison's service record," Reynolds replied. "Row 42B is available. Middle seat. Enjoy." As Walsh pushed past, Walter spoke quietly. "Son, 40 years from now, you won't remember the deal you closed. You'll remember the day you took a seat from a man who gave everything for your freedom." Walsh's face went white. He hurried back through the gauntlet of standing passengers, meeting no one's eyes. Captain Reynolds personally helped Walter into 1A, adjusting it for his comfort. The first-class attendant appeared immediately. "Sergeant Major, what do you need? Medication?" "My pills, please." "They're in my jacket. I'll get them immediately, sir." Reynolds knelt beside him. "Sergeant Major, Sky West will provide lifetime. First-class travel and a full apology. This will never happen again." The first-class cabin erupted in applause. A young man in 2B stood up, emotional. "Sergeant Major, you saved my grandfather, Lieutenant James Park, November 1969. He lived because of you." Walter stared, recognition dawning. Jimmy Park, tough kid. 3 kids, 7 grandchildren, all because of you. The cabin filled with tears. In seat 1A, Walter Morrison was finally visible, not as an inconvenience, but as the hero he'd always been. Behind it all, Madison Cross watched from the galley, understanding at last what she'd nearly destroyed. As the flight continued, word spread through the aircraft. Passengers shared videos, whispered stories, and more people wanted to speak with Walter. What followed was extraordinary. Mrs. Patterson approached respectfully. "Sergeant Major," "Several. Passengers would like to thank you personally if you're willing." Walter, now comfortable with medication working and leg properly supported, nodded. First came Patricia Henley from row 19. "You flew my son out of Firebase Alpha in 1970 after he stepped on a mine. The medics said 5 more minutes and he wouldn't have made it. He's a grandfather now." Next, Tom Rodriguez in a Marine's cap. "My uncle was Lieutenant Michael Rodriguez, wounded at Hill 825. You landed under mortar fire to get him. He became a teacher, 30 years teaching kids in Detroit. But the most powerful moment came from Carol Manning, clutching a worn envelope. My brother was Private First Class Danny Manning, December 3rd, 1969. Walter's face changed. Danny Manning. The weather was too bad. Zero visibility. We tried. 3 times, I'm so sorry. Carol knelt beside him. No apologies, I came to thank you. She opened the envelope, revealing a yellowed letter. Danny's squad leader wrote this. Danny lived 6 hours after being hit, and all 6 hours he could hear your helicopter trying to get through. His last words were, "Tell Morrison to stop." It's too dangerous. She pressed the letter into Walter's hands. You see, my brother didn't die alone. He died knowing someone was fighting to bring him home. For 50 years we've told his story, about the pilot who wouldn't give up. You gave us honor instead of abandonment. The entire first-class cabin was crying. Dr. Martinez, who'd moved forward to check on Walter, would later write, "An airplane became a congregation of memory, each passenger a thread in a tapestry spanning generations." Flight attendants stopped. Regular service. Other passengers shared stories. Children of veterans, veterans themselves, lives touched by war and service. Someone started Amazing Grace, others joining until half the plane was singing. Walter sat overwhelmed, tears flowing. Freely, for decades he'd carried the burden alone, faces of the saved, but more heavily faces of the lost. Now he learned that even his failures had been victories, that trying had mattered, that not giving up had given comfort beyond measure. Madison Cross watched from the galley, worldview shattered. She'd seen an inconvenience, missed the hero, underneath. As she'd later tell investigators, she'd nearly robbed the world of this moment of healing, all for a Platinum member's comfort. By the time Flight 447 descended into Seattle, Hero in Seat 1A was trending nationally. Videos of Captain Reynolds' salute and the standing ovation had gone viral. News outlets were calling Sky West, military organizations were sharing Walter's story, and something unprecedented was happening at the airport. Marcus Chen, the Sky West VP, had flown in from San Francisco. The airline's CEO had cleared his schedule. More surprisingly, veterans from across the Pacific Northwest had gathered at SeaTac Airport, alerted through military networks. Captain Reynolds made a final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, quite a reception awaits. Sergeant Major Morrison." "Would you do us the honor of deplaning first?" Walter protested, but passengers insisted. As he prepared to leave, Madison Cross approached hesitantly. "Sergeant Major, I'm so ashamed. I saw you but didn't really see you. My grandfather served in Korea. He died last year, and I never asked about his service." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I'm sorry." Walter patted her shoulder gently. "We all have blind spots. What matters is what we do once we can see. Honor your grandfather by really seeing the next veteran who crosses your path." Madison would resign the next day, not in shame, but in purpose. Within 6 months, she'd work for a non-profit helping veterans navigate air travel with dignity. Within a year, she'd help implement nationwide airline policies protecting passengers with service-connected disabilities. As Walter emerged from the jet bridge, he stopped in shock. The gate area was packed. Veterans in motorcycle leathers, VFW caps, dress uniforms. A color guard stood at attention. A banner read, "Welcome home, Sergeant Major Morrison. Your service mattered." Young Marines in dress blues snapped to attention, rendering perfect salutes. Behind them, service members from every branch, every generation. Civilians with hands over hearts, children waving flags, airline employees who'd abandoned post to bear witness. Marcus Chen stepped forward. "Sergeant Major Morrison, please accept our deepest apologies. You have lifetime platinum status with first-class travel for you and a companion. Additionally, we're implementing the Morrison Protocol. No veteran with documented service-connected disabilities will ever be involuntarily relocated." But Walter was looking past him to his family, his son holding the baby he'd endured so much to see. As he held his great-grandson, surrounded by uniforms and grateful strangers, Walter understood how his service had rippled forward to create this moment, how this moment would ripple forward to shape others. 6 months later, I interviewed Walter Morrison for a documentary about viral moments that changed lives. He lived in a modest apartment near his son, walls decorated with photos, Eleanor, his family, and now a framed picture from the airport, holding his great-grandson while surrounded by saluting Marines. "I spent 50 years trying to forget Vietnam," Walter reflected. "Now I spend my days talking about it." He'd become an inadvertent spokesperson for veteran recognition, speaking at schools and corporate events. Madison Cross often joined him, sharing her perspective on blindness to heroes among us. Together they'd trained over 10,000 airline employees. "Madison sends monthly letters," Walter smiled, showing me one. "Updates on veterans she's helped. Policies changed. That young woman turned her mistake into a mission. That's real courage." I asked what he remembered most from the flight. "Carol Manning," he said immediately. "Danny's sister. For 50 years, I carried guilt about the ones I couldn't save. She taught me that trying mattered, that bearing witness mattered." He showed me hundreds of letters, from families whose loved ones were saved by rescue pilots, from young veterans finding hope their service would be remembered, from airline employees who'd changed how they see passengers, from ordinary people inspired to look closer, act better. "This one's my favorite," he said, showing a crayon drawing. 7-year-old from Ohio drew me as a superhero at my age. The Morrison Protocol had been adopted by every major U.S. airline. Veterans with service-connected disabilities were now protected. More importantly, a cultural shift had occurred. Crews trained to see beyond surfaces, recognizing every passenger carried stories worthy of respect. Captain Reynolds, promoted to chief pilot, now trained every new captain. "Your plane is more than aluminum and fuel. It's a gathering of human stories. Treat it as such." Even Brendan Walsh had apologized, donating $100,000 to veteran causes after his teenage daughter asked, "Dad, is that who you are?" He now flew coach exclusively. "We're all just people trying to get somewhere," Walter told me, "but how we treat each other on the journey defines us." That day, I thought I was just going to a baptism. Instead, I found proof that kindness isn't dead. That service is still honored, that Americans still do the right thing when reminded. 2 years later, Walter passed peacefully, his funeral attended by over 1,000 people, including many from Flight 447. But his story lives on, in policies protecting vulnerable passengers, in veterans finding their voices, in young people learning heroism takes many forms, and in the simple truth that everyone deserves dignity, every service deserves recognition, and every injustice deserves to be challenged. Welcome to Stories Unraveled, where ordinary moments become extraordinary when we choose to see, stand, and speak. Thank you for joining us. Remember, when you witness injustice, you have a choice. Be a silent witness, or be the person who stands up and says, "This is wrong. The choice is yours."